Before we begin, if you enjoy real-life workplace stories, powerful life lessons, and moments that make you rethink everything you thought you knew about people, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Every story shared here comes with a lesson you might not expect, just like the one you're about to hear. Because sometimes the moment that changes your career forever begins with a simple knock on a door. I work at one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in downtown Chicago, the kind of place where the glass walls shine, the marble floors echo with hurried footsteps, and every person walking through the lobby carries an air of quiet ambition. On the surface, everything about the firm looks polished, controlled, and perfect. But if there's one thing I learned during my time there, it's this. Behind polished reputations and expensive suits, secrets move just as quickly as ambition. My name is Jessica Palmer, and for the past 2 years I've worked at Grant & Associates. Landing a job there straight out of law school felt like winning the lottery of legal careers. Most young lawyers spend years trying to get into firms like this. I got in early, and from my very first day, I understood something important. Survival in a place like Grant & Associates isn't just about intelligence or talent. It's about knowing when to speak, when to stay silent, and most importantly, when to stay out of trouble. So that's exactly what I did. I kept my head down. I did my work carefully, and I stayed as far away from office politics as possible. Because if there's one thing every junior associate learns quickly, it's that law firms operate a lot like ecosystems. There are hierarchies, alliances, silent rivalries, and unspoken rules. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself caught in the middle of something you never intended to be part of. My boss, Richard Grant, was the perfect example of that kind of power. His name carried weight in legal circles all across the country. Senior partners mentioned him with respect. Clients trusted him with billion-dollar mergers. Junior associates whispered about him like he was some kind of myth. He was brilliant. No one questioned that. But brilliance doesn't always come wrapped in warmth. Richard Grant was the kind of man people admired and feared at the same time. He was tall, always perfectly dressed in suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And he carried himself with a calm authority that made people straighten their posture the moment he entered a room. But what people remembered most about him wasn't his voice. It was his silence. Richard Grant had a way of looking at someone without saying a word that made them instantly wonder if they had made a mistake. Even if they hadn't. He was sharp, calculating, observant, and above all else, unreadable. Working under him meant pressure, but it also meant opportunity. So like every ambitious young associate, I worked harder than I ever had before. Long hours, late nights, endless document reviews, corporate mergers that stretched across hundreds of pages of contracts. And yet, strangely enough, I didn't mind. Because every small success inside that firm felt like climbing one more step up a ladder that thousands of other lawyers wished they were on. That's why, on one particular Thursday afternoon, I was completely absorbed in my work. I was sitting at my desk reviewing details of a merger contract for a major acquisition we were handling. The Patterson acquisition had been consuming most of my week, and the deadline was approaching quickly. My desk was covered with printed pages, highlighted sections, sticky notes marking revisions that needed to be made before the final draft. The office was quiet except for the distant hum of printers and the occasional footsteps in the hallway. Then my email notification appeared. At first, I almost ignored it. But when I glanced at the sender, my stomach tightened slightly. Richard Grant. The message itself was short. Very short. Jessica. Report to my office at 4 p.m. sharp. Grant. That was it. No explanation. No context. Just the time. And his name. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. My mind instantly started racing through every possibility. Had I made a mistake in the Patterson file? Had something gone wrong with the merger documentation? Had I overlooked a clause? I quickly opened several documents and began reviewing the work I had done earlier that week. Everything seemed correct. Every section had been checked. Every figure confirmed. And yet, the message still made my pulse quicken. Because people didn't just get summoned into Richard Grant's office without a reason. Especially junior associates. The minutes leading up to 4 o'clock passed more slowly than usual. I tried to focus on my work, but my attention kept drifting back to the clock in the corner of my computer screen. 3:47 p.m. 3:52 p.m. 3:56 p.m. Finally, at exactly 4 o'clock, I stood up from my desk, smoothed the front of my blazer, and walked down the hallway toward the corner office that overlooked the Chicago skyline. The marble floors echoed softly beneath my heels as I approached the large wooden door with a small brass nameplate that read, Richard Grant, Senior Partner. I paused for a moment outside the door, took a breath, then knocked once. Usually, Richard responded immediately with a short, firm come in. But this time, something unexpected happened. Instead of his deep voice, I heard a woman speak. Come in. I frowned slightly. For a brief moment I wondered if I had knocked on the wrong door. But the nameplate was unmistakable. So I slowly opened it. And what I saw inside instantly told me that something about this meeting was very different from what I had expected. Because sitting behind Richard Grant's massive mahogany desk was not Richard Grant. It was a woman I had never seen before. She looked to be in her early 40s, with dark hair neatly pinned into an elegant chignon. She wore a crisp white blazer that gave her a commanding presence, the kind that suggested she was used to being taken seriously the moment she entered a room. But what struck me most about her were her eyes. They studied me carefully, not with hostility, not with warmth either, but with a calm, thoughtful curiosity, mixed with something else I couldn't quite identify. Calculation. She stood as I entered the room. You must be Jessica Palmer, she said, extending her hand. Her voice was smooth, confident. I shook her hand automatically. Yes, that's me. She nodded slightly. I'm Claire Grant. Then she added, almost casually, Richard's wife. For a second, my brain struggled to process what she had just said. Richard Grant's wife? Standing in his office? Talking to me? I had worked at the firm for 2 years, and I had never once seen her before. My mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Claire seemed to notice my confusion. She gave a small smile and gestured toward the chair in front of the desk. Please sit. Still trying to understand what was happening, I slowly lowered myself into the chair. Every instinct in my mind was suddenly on alert. This situation wasn't just unusual. It was unprecedented. Claire walked back around the desk and sat down across from me. I know this must feel unexpected, she said calmly. That's because it is. She folded her hands neatly on the desk. My husband is currently out meeting with a client. Then she looked directly at me. And he doesn't know I'm here. The moment Claire Grant said that Richard didn't know she was there, a strange silence filled the office. The kind of silence that makes you suddenly aware of every small sound in the room. The soft hum of the air conditioning. The faint noise of traffic far below the windows. Even the subtle ticking of the clock on the wall. I straightened slightly in my chair, unsure how to respond. Richard Grant's wife had somehow entered his office and asked to meet me privately. There was no training in law school for moments like this. Claire studied my expression carefully, as if she could read every thought passing through my mind. You're wondering why you're here, she said calmly. I nodded slightly. Yes, ma'am. She gave a small, knowing smile. I imagine you're also wondering whether you've done something wrong. That part surprised me enough to make me exhale a quiet laugh. Honestly, yes. Her smile faded slightly, replaced by something more thoughtful. You haven't done anything wrong, Jessica. In fact, quite the opposite. She leaned back in Richard's large leather chair, glancing briefly around the office as if it carried memories she wasn't sure she wanted to revisit. I've seen your name quite a lot recently, she continued. That caught my attention. My name? Yes, she said. Your work. She tapped lightly on the desk. Your reports, your memos, your legal analysis. Richard brings work home sometimes. Not often, but enough. My mind raced trying to understand what she meant. I'm sorry, I said carefully. I didn't realize. You weren't supposed to, she interrupted gently. Her tone wasn't harsh, but it was precise. Jessica, I used to work here. That made me blink. At this firm. She nodded. Long before I became Claire Grant. Her gaze drifted toward the tall windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Back then I was Claire Whitmore, a junior associate. Ambitious, focused, eager to prove myself. The way she said it made it sound like she was remembering a completely different life. One of the youngest associates in the corporate division, she continued. I worked long hours. Volunteered for every difficult assignment. Stayed late when everyone else left. I shifted slightly in my chair. That sounded familiar. Very familiar. Claire looked back at me. And eventually, Richard noticed. The room suddenly felt smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. I was flattered, she said quietly. Of course I was. He was already a rising star at the firm. Powerful. Intelligent. Charismatic when he wanted to be. She paused for a moment. And when someone like that singles you out, it feels like recognition. I didn't say anything, but something inside me tightened, because I knew exactly what she meant. Claire continued speaking slowly, almost like she was carefully choosing which memories to revisit. He started giving me more responsibilities. Important cases. Opportunities most junior associates would have waited years for. She glanced at me again. Sound familiar? My throat felt dry. Because yes, it did. Richard had recently started assigning me more significant work as well. The Patterson acquisition being one of them. Claire saw the realization flicker across my face. That's what I thought, she said quietly. I felt a strange mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Are you saying that Richard has a pattern? She finished for me. She sighed softly. I'm saying that Richard Grant is a man who enjoys the challenge of talent. Her words were careful. But once the challenge disappears, so does the interest. She stood up slowly and walked toward the window. For a moment she simply stared out at the skyline. When I first started working here, I thought he was mentoring me. She folded her arms. He praised my work, invited me to private meetings, asked me to attend off-site client dinners. My heart sank slightly, because some of those things had already started happening with me. Eventually, she continued, that professional interest turned into something more personal. She didn't say the words directly, but the meaning was clear. I believed him when he said he respected my talent, she said softly. And to be fair, I think he did. She turned back toward me. But respect isn't the same thing as commitment. I remained silent, because suddenly the entire conversation felt heavier than before. Jessica, she said gently, I'm not here to accuse you of anything. I don't believe you've done anything inappropriate. She walked back toward the desk and leaned against it. In fact, that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. I frowned slightly. Why? Her answer came without hesitation. Because you remind me of myself. That sentence lingered in the air. You're talented, she continued. You're disciplined. And you're working yourself to exhaustion trying to prove that you belong here. Her eyes softened slightly. I remember exactly what that feels like. I looked down briefly at my hands. Because she wasn't wrong. I'm not here to ruin your career, she said. I'm here to protect it. That caught me off guard. Protect it. She nodded. Yes. Then she said something I would never forget. Don't confuse attention for opportunity. The words landed harder than I expected. Claire picked up her purse from the chair beside the desk. I made that mistake, she continued. I believed that Richard's attention meant I was special. Her expression darkened slightly, but eventually I realized something. What? I asked quietly. She gave a small, sad smile. I wasn't special. I was simply the next person who impressed him. The honesty in her voice was almost unsettling. And when the challenge disappeared, she said slowly, so did the fascination. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then she stepped toward the door. Before leaving, she turned back toward me. You're smarter than I was, she said. You still have the chance to decide what kind of story your career will tell. Her hand rested briefly on the door handle. Just remember something. She paused. Powerful men often confuse admiration with ownership. Then she opened the door. And ambitious women sometimes mistake attention for respect. With that she left. The door closed softly behind her. And suddenly I was alone in Richard Grant's office. I sat there for several minutes, staring at the massive desk in front of me, trying to process everything she had just said. At first I wondered if I should ignore the conversation completely. Maybe she had misunderstood things. Maybe she was bitter. Maybe this had nothing to do with me. But the more I thought about it, the more pieces began falling into place. The late-night emails, the subtle compliments, the way Richard sometimes asked me to stay behind after meetings. Nothing inappropriate, nothing obvious, but enough to make me question whether there was an unspoken direction to it all. And suddenly Claire's warning didn't feel dramatic. It felt accurate. About 20 minutes later, the office door opened again. Richard Grant walked in. He looked slightly surprised to see me still sitting there. But only slightly. "Jessica," he said calmly, removing his coat and placing it over the back of his chair. "I hope you weren't waiting too long." His expression remained perfectly composed. As always. He walked behind the desk and sat down. Then he looked at me carefully. "Everything all right?" For a brief moment I considered telling him about the conversation with Claire. But something told me that wouldn't change anything. Instead, I smiled politely. "Yes," I said. "I was just thinking about my future." He nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. "Good," he said. "I have a new assignment I'd like you to handle." But this time, I was already thinking about a different plan. That evening, long after most of the office lights had gone dark, I sat at my desk drafting an email. It wasn't a resignation letter. Not exactly. It was a formal request for a departmental transfer. Another division inside the firm had been expanding recently, and they needed experienced associates. The move wouldn't hurt my career. If anything, it would broaden my experience. But more importantly, it would place distance between me and Richard Grant. When I finished writing the message, I read it twice. Then I clicked send. As the email disappeared from my screen, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because Claire Grant had given me something rare that afternoon. Not a threat. Not an accusation. A warning. One that had come from someone who had already lived the consequences. And sometimes, the most valuable lessons in your career don't come from your boss. They come from the person who already learned the hard way what happens when ambition meets power. I had been called into my boss's office that day expecting criticism. Instead, his wife gave me the most valuable lesson of my entire career. And it was a lesson I would never forget. If this story made you think twice about ambition, power, and the choices we make in our careers, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories with powerful lessons. And remember, sometimes the most important advice in life comes from the person who already learned the hard way.